Debbie Durham and I, along with a delegation of about 26 people, returned from our trade mission to Brazil and Chile on Saturday. And it was a very productive mission. We had 27 different meetings. We met with the governor of Sao Paulo. We met with the vice governor in Rio, in Porto Alegre, which is the state of Rio do Sul, and we also had the opportunity to meet with the agriculture minister and the economic minister in Chile, and Ambassador Wolf from Chile hosted a reception for us. We met with many Iowa companies that are doing significant business in Chile and in Brazil, and we met with prospects that we're working to try to attract to make investments in Iowa. So I feel it's a very productive mission. There's going to be a lot of follow-up that we'll be doing on that, but there's, next to China and Asia, I think that our greatest opportunities for additional trade and investment are going to come from South America. This morning, I want to thank all of you for joining us, and I want to especially thank Secretary of Agriculture and Land and Stewardship Jill Northey, Administrator Mark Scouten, Director Chuck Gipp, and Director Paul Trombino for joining us today. Today, we want to take some time to talk about a topic that is on the minds of many Iowans, and that is the severe drought that's affecting our state and nation. Most recent USDA drought monitor shows almost 75% of Iowa is now in D2 severe drought stage, roughly 25% in D3 extreme drought stage. To give you an idea of how quickly the conditions are deteriorating, just prior to the public summit that Lieutenant Governor and I held on drought conditions 2 weeks ago in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, just 12% of the state's land was considered in D2 severe drought stage. It was at this meeting in Mount Pleasant where we as a state were able to hear directly from impacted farmers, producers, and other producers. At this meeting, certain action items that the state could help with were suggested by impacted stakeholders. Today we wanted to share some of the actions that we've taken to help those impacted by the drought conditions. 2 weeks ago today, I sent a letter to Secretary Vilsack informing him of the worsening conditions here in the state of Iowa. In this letter, I requested the Secretary declare Iowa counties as secretarial disaster designations as soon as they qualify. Also in the letter, I asked the Secretary to open CRP lands as soon as possible under federal guidelines, and just recently, Secretary Vilsack announced the USDA will indeed open CRP lands for emergency grazing in 26 counties in Iowa, and that CRP lands will open for all Iowa counties as soon as August 2nd for haying and grazing. We certainly appreciate the work that the Secretary has done on this pressing issue facing the ag community in Iowa. We look forward to continued coordination with our federal partners at USDA and the Farm Service Agency. But to further this efforts, the state has also taken action to provide more assistance. Last week, through my office, we opened Iowa land managed by the DNR to our farmers and producers for emergency grazing and haying. Having access to an additional 6,000 acres is something that should provide immediate relief to those who are being impacted by these severe drought conditions. We appreciate the quick action by Director Gibb and the DNR on this important issue. Another item of significant concern was the need to relax certain rules and regulations that would hinder the swift relief for those who need it the most. As mentioned earlier, there is an increased demand for hay, straw, and stover for our livestock producers. So just last Wednesday, I approved a statewide disaster emergency proclamation that temporarily waives certain weight, width, and hour restrictions on services required for transporting hay, straw, and stover. By signing this proclamation, our livestock producers are already facing high feed prices will see relief in lower transportation costs and increased speed to have access to hay, straw, and stover. So I'd like to thank Director Trombino and his staff for working hard on these issues. I would also like to turn it over now to Lieutenant Governor Kim Reynolds to give you more information.
Well, thank you, Governor, and welcome back. In addition to the proclamation that the Governor just mentioned, I also want to remind Iowans that the state opened up DOT roadside ditches as another avenue for farmers to mow and bale hay. Through this program, farmers can obtain a DOT permit to bale hay on roadside ditches as an economical and efficient way for producers to obtain hay for their livestock. Another program we would like to draw attention to briefly is the Beginning Farmer Loan Program through the Iowa Ag Development Authority. Through this program, farmers can obtain low-interest loans to assist them with the cost for eligible programs. And despite its name, the program eligibility is not based on the age of the farmer, but rather it's based on the net worth of the applicant. So I would encourage those impacted to also explore this as an option. Our administration firmly believes that the best way to attack any potential disaster is through a proactive strategy. Part of this strategy involves ensuring that the lines of communication between the private and the public sectors remain open. To that end, members of our staff, along with key agency staff members, have begun holding weekly conference calls with the leadership of Iowa Farmer and Producer Associations. The first call actually took place last Thursday at 10:30 and will continue to be held on that same time every Thursday until the conditions on the ground dictate otherwise. The purpose of these calls is to ensure that the concerns and questions of our impacted farmers and producers are being heard and addressed, as well as potential solutions on how we continue to react to the drought conditions. Lastly, we also want to make Iowans aware of a website that the Governor's office has launched, and it's governor.iowa.gov/drought, or it can be accessed through the Governor's website or my website, and it's for serve as a clearinghouse, for Iowans looking for information on the drought. We actually implemented the same type of a website during the flooding in Missouri last year, and it was a very effective way to gather information. So we would encourage Iowans to take time to visit that. And at this point, it's my pleasure to turn the mic over to our great Secretary of Ag, Bill Markey.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I want to talk just a few minutes about some of the conditions out there. And all of us here, as well as many of you, have been around the state to look at those conditions. And as the Governor pointed out, with the drought conditions now really statewide, there has been no one out in the agricultural areas that have been spared. There are differences. There are some areas that are not as damaged as others. There's certainly some areas that the crops, certainly the corn crop in some places, is almost finished here even in July. So those rains have been spotty. In fact, we got some more rains over this last weekend. This weekend we got about 2,700 of rain on average across the state. We normally, even in a weekend like this, the end of July, get 4/10. So for the state, our numbers so far in July are 1.12 inches on average for the state of Iowa. We normally get about 4.37 inches in July. So that ranks us as the 5th driest July on record over, I think it's about 136 years worth of weather records. And we are also the 3rd hottest July. And the combination of those creates real stress on our crops out there, our corn and soybean crops, as well as our pasture, as well as water demand that you see in our urban and rural areas. So last year, or every year, we produce about 23 million acres of corn and soybeans. 2/3 of the land in Iowa is planted to corn and soybeans every year. That produces a huge crop compared to other places. We're the largest corn and soybean producing state in the country. In fact, we're the 4th largest corn producing country in the world. There's only 3 countries that produce more corn than the state of Iowa normally does. We'll see what this year's bring yet. But that then produces a phenomenal livestock industry as well, and all these folks are under stress right now. Certainly the crop farmers, as they see their crops fail, but the livestock producers as well, as they're trying to feed. So not only are we seeing stress in that corn and soybean land, we're also seeing stress in the pasture land and hay land that we have out there as well. And that's why certainly the actions that the governor's office has taken has been so important to be able to help those livestock producers. Right now, much of our corn is kind of got its maximum yield potential, and we'll see whether it keeps that or not. If it gets enough rain to go ahead and fill those kernels. You see some corn in front of you, and there's all kinds of examples out there of corn in various conditions. Soybeans yet have some time. They have been hurt, but they have some time here in August if we can get some rains to be able to have a respectable soybean crop out there as well. Most of the pastures have finished in their ability to produce, and so we have most cattle feeders or cow-calf folks that are running cattle on pastures are now feeding those animals supplemental hay, either on pastures or taking them off of pastures. That normally doesn't happen until October, when you have corn stalks to go to try to be able to get all the way to that time. We're seeing some corn chopping going on as well for feed, where the farmer chops the whole plant and it goes in and they use that for feed to replace some of the hay. That normally doesn't happen until September. So the maturity of the crop has moved very quickly as well. So there's a lot of things that are happening very quickly. I was in Ida County yesterday, and there's some ears that are hanging down on the ear, meaning they're done. They're done filling. They're ready to go. In some cases, almost ready to start combining. But they're also much smaller than what we would hope for them to be. So it is varied across the state, and it is a real challenge to figure out what the state's going to have in total corn production. We do know that this will have an impact well beyond the corn and soybean producers, well beyond the livestock producers out there, and the ethanol plants out there into the state's general economy. But again, we can't know what that is. But that agricultural impact has been great over the last 5 years. And it's been very, very important to the state's economy, and this remixing and this challenging time that we have will make it a real challenge to figure out, and certainly affects some of the folks up and down Main Street as well. So we certainly will keep working, and there's been a lot of work, as the governor pointed out, with the federal government as well, to be able to work with all the programs that are possible with the federal government to reach out to our producers. There are many issues yet to come. Certainly how much production will be, but there's going to be grain quality issues as the drought has impacted likely the grain quality that's produced out there. There'll be other livestock issues. There's even watering issues in some cases, whether there's enough water as some of the ponds have dried up there. So there's a lot of work yet to be done. We'll continue to work with the governor's office, from the Iowa Department of Agriculture, as well as the DNR and DOT and Department of Homeland Security. And so my pleasure to introduce the Administrator of Homeland Security, Scott.
Thank you, Secretary Norby. Good morning. As Lieutenant Governor Rendell said, the best way to attack a potential disaster is through a proactive strategy. And for Homeland Security and Emergency Management, this means getting a clear picture of current conditions and available resources so we can determine response actions that may become necessary should this drought continue. So we're communicating, coordinating with local, state, federal, and private sector partners as a way of preparing for the state to respond as quickly as possible for requests for state assistance. On Monday, July 23, we convened a meeting of the key partners at the State Emergency Operations Center in Johnson to do just this. Some of the participants included representatives from the Iowa Rural Water Association, various commodity groups, the Safeguard Iowa Partnership, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, and other state agencies. The good news from the meeting was that the rural water representatives reported that their systems were in good shape at this time. They're able to meet the increased demand for water. And they can meet this increased demand for water due to the steps they took to strengthen their systems after the 1988 drought. In some of the 19 rural water systems throughout the state, as many as 90% of the livestock producers are connected to rural water systems. And although those systems are being taxed and they're producing record amounts of water, they continue to meet demand. Some of them are looking to drill new wells. They're looking forward, sensing that their water levels are dropping, and so they're working with DNR to increase their ability to generate water. Now, we're talking with DNR to see if there are rules and regulations in respect to drilling additional wells that can be waived to make this process go quicker. We plan to have this group meet again this week to continue planning should the drought get worse. We also had met by a conference call last week with the Midwest Governors Association to talk with the other governors in this region who are experiencing many of the same issues that we are. Some of those states are in better conditions, some are in worse conditions than we are. We particularly are interested in Wisconsin and Minnesota, where their conditions are better, and we may be in a position to import hay from those states. And so we're concerned that there may be DOT regulations that need to be tweaked, adjusted, waived in some instances, so that people who are transporting hay from Wisconsin and Minnesota can come into Iowa without being stopped at the border for regulatory purposes. Tomorrow morning, we'll hold a conference call with the state's emergency management coordinators from all the counties who have been invited to discuss their current situations in their counties and their plans to deal with the drought should it continue. Our office stands ready to work with them also to give them whatever state resources they need to fight this drought at their local level. In that sense, we are all leaning forward so we can act quickly and effectively should the drought worsen. None of us can snap our fingers and make it rain, nor can we increase the amount of rain that we do receive. But we can take those steps necessary to prepare a response should things worsen, so that the full range of private and public resources can be brought to bear to help our state through this drought. And this we are doing.
Mark, thank you, and Bill, thank you. I mentioned, actually Bruce Troutman is here representing DNR. He's the deputy director as opposed to Chuck Gibb. And Paul Trevino, they're also available to help us in terms of responding to questions, but we'd open it to your questions at this point.
Mr. Northey, do you expect combines to roll into the fields in August? And if so, given how dry those fields are, what sort of fire precautions maybe these emergency managers in the 99 counties need to discuss?
Yeah, there are, I believe, in some of the packets of information, there are some fire bans, open fire bans right now that recognizes that we have some very, very dry conditions. And we're seeing some of those corn stalks dry up now, and by the time those combines hit those fields, which may just be weeks from now in some cases, in some of those drier areas, they will be in very dry conditions. Again, we all hope that between now and then we have some rainfall and we wet things up a little bit, both the stalks that are there and the land that's out there and the grass that's out there that's still left. But I do believe harvest will be early. We are seeing maturities move along a lot faster, in part because it was shorter water, in part because of the heat. We did get in the fields early this last spring, but we're likely to see some harvest start, certainly I believe in August. As we've seen already some chopping, silage cutting happen in July, which has been a long time that that's happened.
We've seen a huge run-up in the prices of farmland, and with many farmers taking on additional land. Is this going to have an impact on the ability of farmers to pay off their land? You recall this happened in 1983. We saw a lot of
Much different than 83 though, because a lot of the land that was being purchased in 83 was being purchased with borrowed money In many instances, it was with variable interest rates. At this point, we have extremely low interest rates, and most of the land that's been purchased has been with cash. There is not nearly the debt load that there was at that time. I would also point out the prices of the commodities are much higher now than they were during that period of time. I think we're already beginning to see some lessening in the increase in the value of farmland, and I would not be surprised if we'll see that level off, if not even a modest reduction. But a lot of it's going to be dependent upon the price of the commodities. And as you know, we've had record high corn and soybean prices here recently.
But bottom line, you don't expect to see a lot
We
of
don't
farmers going
anticipate that
under
right now.
financially.
Obviously, I think those of us that lived through the farm crisis in the 80s are apprehensive about these very high land prices. But I think we also need to recognize the circumstances are much different than they were then. We don't have the large amount of debt. We don't have people that were basically buying farmland as a hedge against inflation. We've had people that have bought farmland, but they've looked at it from a profitability perspective and looking at commodity prices and, for that matter, even livestock prices being very favorable in recent years. Now, interest rates continue to be extremely low, and that can't last forever. And when we start seeing interest rates go up, that could also have an impact. But we don't see that happening in the near future because the Federal Reserve has purposely kept interest rates at unbelievably low prices.
With the Farm Bill stalling in Congress, what kind of impact do you see that having on this situation?
Well, first of all, I think you need to recognize that a decision was made a number of years ago in the Congress to go away from ad hoc disasters to crop insurance. And so the federal government has subsidized crop insurance so they do not have to pass a big ad hoc multi-billion-dollar disaster assistance program like they did in the past. And you probably heard about 90% of the crops in Iowa are insured. Now that doesn't mean they're going to have the kind of profits we've seen the last couple of years because, and there is, the level of insurance varies, but to a great degree a lot of farmers get enough coverage to protect their costs, their rent costs and their input costs, but probably isn't going to mean a lot of profitability. The bigger concern is the livestock producers. And that's why we're trying to do these things in terms of haying and grazing and transporting of hay and stover and all of that to try to help the livestock producers through this difficult time. And as I understand it, certain aspects of the Farm Bill affecting livestock expired September 30th of last year. So there is discussion of either passing a new Farm Bill, but there are differences of opinion on that. Remember, the big cost of the Farm Bill isn't for farmers. It's the food stamp subsidy. That's where the big growth has been. That's where the big costs are. So agriculture, actually, the producers, get a very small share of the money that is spent in the Farm Bill.
If the House bill is extended, any speculation as to what livestock producers can expect?
Well, it's my understanding that's one of the things that's being considered is just to extend that program so that you reinstate the provisions that would help the livestock producers through this drought situation for this coming year.
Governor, could you tell us what specific steps you've told the state to take in order to cut water usage?
Well, I don't know.
Have there been any?
No.
I don't know that the state, we haven't.
Local.
Yeah, I think, you know, the city of Des Moines has done some
Yeah,
things.
at a local
I think
level.
we did hear from Mark that most of the rural districts, rural water districts, we went through this in '88, and I was governor during that time. I remember transporting water. We actually had a pipeline that we reversed to take water from Des Moines down to Lamoni in southern Iowa. But they have subsequently, in some of those areas in southern Iowa that had some water issues, made some significant investments, and they're in a much better situation today. So water, we have not had a significant water problem. We do need to be very careful about that. Thank God we're not like so many of these places that rely so much. I mean, you know, we're not Southern California, we're not Arizona, we're not even Nebraska. Generally, you know, as we know last year, our water problem was an excess water problem. So this is kind of an unusual situation, but I think the rural water districts have really managed the situation quite well, and we have not heard grave concerns at the state level on that. And obviously, I've been gone, but
Well, and as Director Scott will talk about, they met last week to be proactive, to take proactive measures so that they could take a look at the rural water district to see how they could be better prepared to move forward to address any issues that may come up.
But have you stopped watering the lawn on Terrace Hill?
generally speaking, we don't water the lawn at Terrace Hill. There are certain areas, I mean, for instance, we have some vegetables. We have a garden in the back, and I think they have watered the tomato plants and some of the vegetables, and maybe some small selected areas, but for the most part, Terrace Hill lawn is not watered.
So you don't think the state has a role in this to try to?
Well, no, we want to be proactive and assist, but there's not a statewide water system as such. You've got a lot of local water municipalities that handle it. You have these rural water districts, and we want to monitor and work with them and provide assistance to them. But we don't see this as a statewide. We don't have a statewide watering system, if you want to know.
But isn't the state capital part of the Des Moines water system?
Right, we don't water the state capitol. If you look out here, you'll see.
It's pretty dry, it's pretty brown.
We have not been watering this lawn either.
There's been no response to the city's call to curb water usage as of yet?
Well, you know, we want people to be able to drink water and things like that, but, you know, like I said, the state capitol grounds, we don't water the lawns here, so that's not been an issue.
And certainly the state's water use is quite small compared to livestock producers who are using water from rural water systems. Rural water systems are concerned. Some are going to be drilling additional wells, but currently they're able to meet capacity. They built out significantly after 1988, and they're pretty comfortable at this moment. They'll be able to continue to meet demand. Some of the large.
Question, Rob.
Secretary Northey, you said that right now corn has its maximum potential. Does that mean if there's timely rains from this point on that we would not see a drop off in production, or are you saying this is as good as it's going to get, and from here on out, and it might end up far less than what normally is?
Yeah, we certainly will see a reduction, significant reduction from the past. Really, pretty much every area of the state will see a reduction from what they had last year, would expect normally. But we don't yet know how much of a reduction. It depends on how much more rain comes. If we could get some additional rains, we'd go ahead and fill that corn out, the kernels that are there. You see on stalks like this, in some cases, some of those kernels are gone. They won't fill out, they won't come back. But the size of the kernels that are remaining will be impacted by how much rain comes between now and when it's finished.
We're too late for the pollination. You can see, you know, that pollination has not been good, and we have many places where the kernels have not formed. Then the other question is, if you've got adequate rain from here on out, it could help in filling it out. But if it continues to be extremely dry conditions, the situation, so it's not going to get any better, but it could get worse, I guess. Soybeans is a different situation. The soybeans basically kind of have been in a holding pattern, and if you get adequate rains here in August, you can still come out a lot better with the soybeans.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Thanks.